To start, I'm going to take off my wheel with a 19mm socket, take off all 5 of your lug nuts. And take off your wheel. Now on the outside, before you remove the caliper off the bracket, you have this big clip here, the spring retainer, and I like to use some locking pliers on it and lock it on, that way it doesn't go flying. You can take it off with a pry bar, but it might go flying. The pliers will grab onto it. Twist it around and remove it off the top, remove it off the bottom, and comes right off. Now we can unbolt the caliper off the bracket. I'm going to take a pry bar. You don't have to do this, but it will make removing the caliper easier. Just squeeze it in like this to compress the piston just a little bit. Okay, that moves just a little. And now take a 7mm Allen, and you'll see these 2 rubber boots here. You'll have a cap on the end. Remove the cap. Mine's missing one of them, but you should have both. Stick your 7mm Allen in there, and let's break free both of these. Okay, remove these fully. That feels like it's not going to come out, but it'll feel like it's loose. Let's do the same to the top. That should be it right there. Remove your tool, and now you can use a little pry bar to help you pry the caliper off of the pads and off of the bracket. Now you can pry the caliper right off. Okay, your inner pad will come with the caliper. The outer pad will stay on the bracket, so keep that in mind. Now you can take the pads. This one has these clips here. You can just pry it out of the piston, take that off, and set the caliper aside. I like to put it on top of the knuckle here where it's going to be secure. You basically don't want it hanging by the brake hose. Now we can remove the outer pad, just slide it straight out. Sometimes you might need a little pry bar to help you along. There we go. Set that aside. Now let's remove the bracket. Now with an 18mm, let's take off these 2 bolts and remove the caliper bracket. I'm going to start with this lower one. There it goes. I'm going to leave this in a few threads. That way it holds the bracket when I remove the top one. Okay, now remove the top bolt and the bottom. Take the bracket right off, and we can go ahead and clean it. You can hit it from the back side. Just be careful not to launch it, and to prevent that, you can put on a lug nut, or you can hit it in between the studs in the front. Just make sure you don't hit the studs. I prefer to hit it from the back side. That way it comes off easier. It broke free, so let's spin it around and hit it on the other side. Okay, broke free on this side. Keep spinning it. There we go. Remove your safety lug nut and remove the rotor. Now I want to clean up this hub surface. That way the new rotor has a nice, clean, flat surface to mount on. Because this one's covered in gunk, I'm just going to spray it down with brake parts cleaner first to remove any old grease that might be here. And now you want to clean it up. I'm going to use a wire brush. Basically, on this style hub, you want to clean up this ridge here and this outer ridge. In the middle, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be flat and have no raised areas. But it's the inner lip and the outer lip that matter. So I'm just going to scrub them down with my wire brush because they're already pretty clean. And then remove any large debris from this middle area. And we'll spray it down with some brake parts cleaner again and coat it. That way this doesn't happen in the future. It's not just the rotor getting stuck that's an issue, but rust buildup between the rotor and the hub will actually push the rotor out at a weird angle, and then it'll create braking issues. So make sure this is nice and clean. I'm going to put some anti-seize on the hub surface here. Focus on these 2 ridges that I mentioned earlier. You can put some in the middle here, but it's not really going to help with the rotor in any way. It's just going to coat it so it doesn't rust, but what matters is this inner ridge and the outer ridge. Get the new rotor, slide it on. I like to put it on backwards first, that way I can clean up the inner surface of the rotor. It comes coated from the factory with oil, that way it doesn't rust when it's sitting on the shelf. And you definitely want to get these oils off. You don't want oils on your brakes. Clean it with a rag and some brake parts cleaner. Take it, flip it over. Now install it the right way. Press it on all the way, and let's clean off the outer surface as well. Wipe that oil off. Make sure it gets cleaned off everywhere. Now I have the caliper bracket on my workbench here. I'm just going to take a wire brush and clean the two ridges where the pads slide in and out. This one isn't too bad. As you can see, it cleans up very well with just the wire brush. If yours is very rusted and rotted and has rust buildup and chunks and flakes and everything, you want to grind it down. But this one isn't too bad at all. So a wire brush will do the trick. You just want to clean off the surface rust and any brake dust that has built up there. Make sure you do the same on both sides. It's important to get it clean so that the pads have a nice smooth area to slide on. You don't want them to get stuck. Let's get the caliper bracket back on, line it up. Start in your 2 bolts. You can put thread locker on these if you'd like. Definitely don't put any anti-seize or grease. Okay, let's bottom these out and then we'll torque them. $129 foot-pounds for both of these. There's one. And 2. Now I have the caliper over here. We're going to have to compress this piston to go back in to make up for the thickness of the new pads. Obviously the old ones are pretty worn out. You can use several tools for this. I have a special caliper depression tool, but you can use a large set of pliers or different caliper depression tools, whatever you have. Just make sure you go very slow no matter what you do. You don't want to go very fast, and you want to press it in all the way. And you also want to make sure that you're going even. So if you end up using pliers, put a brake pad in like I'm doing. That way you press flat on the piston. You don't want to just press on one side, then it gets jammed in there crooked, and then you have different issues. So again, go very slow, and you want to make sure you go all the way, because if you don't, then, oh, there we go, that just bottomed out right there. If you don't go all the way, your new pads, or your caliper won't fit over the new pads. These are pretty stuck in here, so I'm going to take some pliers, very gently put them here. You don't want to damage the boot on either sides. And I'm just going to try to push these through. There we go. All right, now I can grab them on this end, slide them out the rest of the way. There we go. These are actually pretty clean, but I will clean up this gunk buildup here. That way it's nice and smooth. Let's do the same to this other one. And when you grease these up, you actually don't put grease on the slider pins because it'll get wiped off as you put it in. You actually put grease inside the slider or the boot. There we go. Do the same to this one. Just wire brush it a little bit. So you don't put a lot of grease in these because it'll just get pushed out. There isn't a lot of room for grease to sit, but put it in here just a little bit, and I'll put the rest on my slider pin, even though most of it is probably going to get wiped off, but at least I tried to lubricate it. By the way, I cleaned up the threads as well in my wire wheel. Now you slide it through. There we go. As you can see, some of it comes off the other, or comes out the other end. Make sure you wipe that off. This slides nice and smooth, much better than before. So leave this like this. The threads were like just barely bottomed out over here. Let's put some grease in here as well. And lubricate the pin as much as you can. Slide this one through as well. Perfect. Remove the excess grease and push it back. That way it can line up with the bolt holes. I'm just going to take a little wire brush and just clean off the dust that has built up on this caliper here. There's quite a bit, and you want to try to prevent it from building up more and more and more. So just scrape it off gently. Rinse it off with some brake cleaner. I'll wait for that to dry. Now I want to apply a little bit of grease to the outer ring of this piston here. This is going to help the pads operate quietly and smoothly. Not a lot, just enough to coat it. And do the same to these two outer ears. It's kind of hard for me to show you because I can't twist it more than this, but just put a little bit of grease on here. Let's put the outer pad in first. You can put grease here if you'd like, but you want to make sure that you put very, very little because it can easily just shoot out that way, go onto the rotor, especially once the brakes get hot. I prefer to leave it bare like this, but like I said, you can put grease, just be very careful of how much you put on there. And now so that's the outer pad, take the inner pad, and this one actually goes into the caliper piston here, gets pressed in like that, make sure it's seated all the way. Now let's take this, put it over. So the slider pins need to be flush with the boot, that way the caliper can slide over. Take the caliper, slide it over, make sure that the inner pad seats itself onto the bracket with both the top and the bottom ears. Once you have it lined up, you can push the slider pins into their corresponding bolt holes. Now let's snug it up with our 7mm Allen. Wiggle it around enough to where you can start these bolts in, or the slider pins, I guess. Once they're started, let's bottom them out, and then we'll come back and torque them. 21 foot-pounds for both of these slider pins. There's one. Let's do the bottom. All right, and now let's reinstall the 2 caps. Again, I only had one, but preferably you want both of them. So try not to lose these, and if you have the top one, go ahead and put that one on too. Don't forget about this retainer here, little spring retainer. Put it on the top first, hook it on, make sure it's engaged here properly, and then put it in on the bottom as well. Make sure it's pressed on all the way. Let's put the wheel back on. Start on all of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 100 foot-pounds.